World Bank called their voluntary disclosure program, where if a company has been involved in corruption, it can report itself to the World Bank and say, we know that there was some corruption in our organization in this particular project, this is what we're doing to remedy it. And by doing so, the company will avoid being debarred by the World Bank for that corruption. If the World Bank can, because it means that the World Bank has all the information necessary to investigate, and if they investigate and find out this is actually what happened, and the company is actually taking measures to redress it, then that company remains safe, as it were. But the bank has more information on the kind of corruption that is going on and on the levels of corruption for its future planning. So that's something that is going on in modern in the fight against corruption now. Another thing which now we know that when corruption is committed by a company, whether it's a multinational or a domestic company, it prevents serious difficulties on how they should be punished, especially when we're dealing with a company. Because even if you can affix, it's very difficult to affix liability to a company, because we know that the law is not wholly in favor of doing that. And so in the absence of that, what many countries are doing, following the trend of the World Bank and the United States, is that they debar these companies. So they say that if they find if a company has been involved in corruption, what they will do is that they will then say, okay, you can't have access to public contracts for a period of time. So that's something that is becoming increasingly important because I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the World Bank and all the international financial institutions have actually signed a document that they will harmonize their debarment practices, so that if a company is debarred by the World Bank, it will then be subsequently be debarred by all the other development banks, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, etc., etc. So we're having this position where we're getting to the internationalization of debarment. Now, debarment is problematic for two reasons. In some cases, it requires a criminal conviction for the debarment to be imposed. Now, we know that criminal convictions for corruption are difficult to obtain, and so if that's the case, then the company doesn't end up being debarred. In other cases, we find that if a conviction is not required, then debarment is done by the procurement official or public official when the company presents itself for a public contract. And in some cases, if the public official himself is not someone who can be relied on, then he ends up using the debarment as a threat for blackmail. So it's problematic, but in spite of that, many countries are beginning to rely on it as a way of punishing companies that have been involved in corruption. So that's another thing that I said is happening in the modern fight against anti-corruption. Now, it may not be, depending on obviously the nature and the typology of corruption that is occurring, it may or may not be relevant. But I don't know if you are following the case of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. And I mean, Lesotho scored a big point for all the countries in Africa when it was able to convict the Canadian firm and the German firm of corruption. And because of that, it led to the debarment of those firms from World Bank contracts. So even though Lesotho itself did not debar those firms, and wouldn't because it doesn't have that legislation in place, that information was used by the World Bank to hit those firms, which did hit them because they are heavily involved in those kinds of development contracts. My firm ACTC can assist with designing and implementing these types of programs, leniency programs, staff training on the things I've mentioned. And in addition, we also do we also assist a lot of countries in terms of procurement training. We're knowledgeable also about whistleblowing systems. We've already mentioned that whistleblowing can be effective in reducing the investigative burden on your agency where resources are scarce, but it also has to be designed in a way to prevent abuse, so that it wouldn't just be abused by people who are discontent about their situation. Now, your constitution already talks about you cooperating in the area of whistleblowing systems. So for you to cooperate in that system, you actually have to have established them. And I've already mentioned the fact that we can discuss with you on how to manage your international perceptions of corruption, one of our partners is the person who actually designed the CPI and put it together. So he can discuss with you on the effective ways or the things that you can do as a country in order to reduce or to improve your ranking on that CPI. So I hope that we will be able to partner together so that your agency can fulfill its potential, even in these challenging environments that we work in. And in your training, in your conference materials, you have an example of some trainings that we've done on the kind of thing that we can do. And we work in two ways. Obviously, we come to you on site, or if you prefer that your staff are all flown over to meet us, then that's also an option. But everything that we do is always tailored to the environment, always tailored to your needs, after an assessment of what those needs are, so that we're not just imposing on you ideas that you cannot use or are not relevant to you. Thank you very much. I'll now take any questions if you have any.
The exposure and how we can be assisted to bring value to the work we are doing. There's just one point which I wanted to know more about.
Yeah.
This lenient approach which is being preferred to the zero tolerance.
Yeah.
I wonder if there is any country in Africa which has done it.
No, there isn't. Because of the African context, a lot of our legislation, is iron cast. And if there's any hint of corruption, I don't know how many years it is in your country, but for instance in Nigeria, it's a minimum of 7 years. So there's no room for leniency, because it will be seen as tolerating corruption. But with the leniency programs, it arises from a perception that this zero tolerance isn't really bringing the results that we expect. So the information isn't coming out, the investigations are leading nowhere. That if we can actually give people an incentive to give us meaningful, real information, real evidence, then they will not be treated as harshly as the law says. So yeah.
So the lenience program, is it as a semblance of pre-bargain approach?
Yes, it's something very close to that, yes. Yeah, but specifically for corruption.
The Zambians actually reduced their penalties by law because it was felt that magistrates were not returning guilty findings because the penalties were so hard. So they reduced their penalties significantly so that in fact you could be found guilty of corruption and get a small fine, in fact a fine much less than restored, or a short suspended sentence. It made no difference whatsoever in the prosecution levels. And they've actually strengthened their penalties again.
But did that depend on whether the person cooperated or voluntarily reported?
There was an element of that, but it was across the board.
Across the board for all criminal offences?
Well, it was, no, for all anti-corruption offences.
Okay.
Related to the anti-corruption legislation, but the very distinct intent in reducing the penalties was to encourage people to report and also to encourage magistrates to return a guilty verdict.
Yeah.
And it actually had no impact.
Okay. What I'll say is that one method in which this could work is possibly, obviously we know that if someone at a higher level has been involved in corruption, they haven't been involved alone. And so if their subordinates are encouraged to report and know that they will be safe, as it were, then it might be easier to actually get the evidence that you need to catch the big fish.
Now, even because of the difficulties in the criminal system, the degree of proof in the leniency program, the suspect will bring the evidence himself, whereas in criminal system it's so hard to prove it. The coercive powers of investigation, getting the evidence that they can be challenged, searches can be challenged, and the investigator is stopped from getting the evidence. Now, the suspect knows all these difficulties the investigator is facing, what will be the real incentive for him to come forward to give you the information if he knows that in the first place you may not even get him?
Yeah. Well, it's true. He knows that in the first place you may not get him, but it's not a certainty. And the fact that someone is already is being investigated means I'm sure that they would already be quite nervous. So even though it might end up, at the end of the day, they may not be convicted, but going through that process of being investigated, possibly being suspended from work while that is going on, I think is not something that even the average corrupt person wants to endure. So this removes that stress or burden from them, but also gives you as the prosecutor the information that you need.
It is a bit interesting. Many countries have been complaining about the CPI and how it is really arrived at. For example, I've been working with the PCCB for 7 years. I've never seen these people talking to us in the field as an input into calculating the CPI. Now here we see this gentleman, Johan Graf Lambsdorff, designing a course to talk to us, to teach, so that the country can get a favorable rating.
Okay. It's not.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Let me just clarify. He can't give you a favorable rating because he in designing the CPI or in producing the CPI every year, he's doing it on behalf of Transparency International. So he's basically putting the numbers together, putting the aggregates together. Now what he can tell you is what goes into the CPI, how the CPI is designed, what they look at. And if you know what they're looking at, then you can know the areas in which you can actually bring some changes or some improvement. So it's not as if he comes to you, he can tell the next day you're going to get a favorable score. No, it doesn't. It doesn't work like that at all.
But that's what I'm saying. It's something like doctoring the data which will be coming out.
No.
And here we are talking of reality.
No, it doesn't.
It's not that way.
No, it's.
Then I'm confused.
You're confused as to the fact that, as to what exactly?
No, let's leave the floor to others.
We are very much interested in that lenient policy that we have, but I fear that we are already defeat, saying that because we can't defeat corruption, then let's try to arrange it. It is accepting defeat before we even start the fight.
I won't say that it's accepting defeat. It's just an alternative strategy. It's not as if with the leniency program, it's not as if you don't you won't have the same approach to corruption. It's just that if you can get people who will report themselves or report someone close to them that they're implicated with, then that person might get, a lesser sentence or might even be set free. So, but it's not as if you won't be fighting, because it's not going to be everyone who reports themselves to you. And even when they do, it has to be that the information that you get is information that is robust, that is relevant, that you can use in other contexts. So it won't apply across board to everyone. So I would say that it's using an alternative strategy, because if we're doing what we're doing and we're not seeing results, then maybe it is time to think about alternative ways of doing it. If the strategy we're using now is working and we're satisfied that it's working, then fine, we don't need to change it. But if it's not working, then we need to think, what can we do to actually make it work? It's just trying to just share alternative ideas and alternative ways of doing things that may yield a result.
We have with the corruption, we have been having the organs of the state that were dealing, classical organs of the state that were dealing with corruption, police, prosecution, and so on. And when we were defeated, we said we put there the anti-corruption authorities. Tomorrow, if we are defeated, we say we will put there the anti-corruption system. I think we should go back and make these organs, the classical organs, to work properly, instead of creating other things. And if we mean to fight corruption, we have to stand up and fight it, by all means. By all means, even if taking the presidents and so on, and putting them into prisons if it is need be. No one is the president here. Besides our president. Because you see, if we go on creating other things while we are, and we don't stick on one fight and really we fight it.
But sir, this is not advocation of the creation of another organization.
It's because perhaps I don't understand it.
No, it's not the creation of an organization. It's just one of the methods that you use. So you already have some of the strategies that you've put in place. So this is just another one. It's not, you are not creating a different organization or a different body. I agree with you that the existing bodies you have must be made to function properly. The anti-corruption bodies must function properly, and they must function properly by thinking about what it is that they're doing, thinking about whether what they're doing is working, and if it's not working, then changing what they're doing that isn't working. So it's not the creation of something, of a new organization, no.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself. Let me say one or two words before you go to sit. I participated last year in Germany. I've been reading a lot about CPI, and I've been reading a lot about Professor Dr. Johann Graf Lambsdorff. He's a professor of economics at the University of Passau in Kiswahili. And when I was there attending a course, I was fascinated by the in-depth of knowledge that this team can bring to us. I'm fascinated because I'm privileged to attend so many conferences and the trainings. But when I attend this course there, they say the course is entitled Economics of Corruption. We read so many books, we read so many literature, but honestly speaking, if you listen to this team, what they do into dissecting corruption, I believe you'll benefit a lot as an organization. And that's why I invited them to come and talk to us, to be connected with them, if you wish, because they'll give us an alternative thinking. The thinking that I've been reading for all these years, I came to realize is like a prototype thinking. It's like 1 + 1 is equal to 2. So really I'm inviting them to engage with you at that level of thinking. And I believe, especially on the preventive mechanism, rather than enforcement, they'll bring a lot of good ideas to our agency. Because as much as we try to criminalize corruption, we are stuck because we get 2 or 3 convictions per year, and the society gets mad on us because they say, oh, come on, we give all these resources, only 3 people. You see, again, these people, in my view, can help us to develop strategies to change the perception. And this guy is a wizard on perception. He's the one who created the CPI, and the CPI is believed by everybody. What's wrong if we get, the nitty-gritty of how he does it, so that we can take advantage of it and improve the perception? Here is the perception. Africa is perceived corrupt. Is it true that Africa is less corrupt? But because the numbers, here is the numbers. How do you aggregate the numbers? So I want them to come and help us. To what extent these numbers can be understood in African context and develop those approaches to change the perception. No matter what we do, we are told we are incompetent, we support the corrupt, but we need also to look at the other approach, and I think this could be useful. So I want you to believe me that I brought them to you because I believe that they can give us an alternative thinking, as contrary to the usual. You go to Bali, you go to China, you go to Malawi, you go to South Africa, the same menu every day, the same menu. So why don't we have a Chinese menu, Korean menu, African menu, if you like, so that we can balance. Especially I'm interested in the preventive aspect. We have spent so much on the enforcement. We need also to look on the preventive aspect. And that's where I need them to come or to work with us who are interested to look on the preventive aspect. I believe if we approach the preventive aspect as well, in a more strong fashion as we do in the enforcement approach, we may come up to a balance. Because the issue is perception. If people believe that you are doing nothing, no matter what, you are doing nothing. So how do you change the perception? It's not the matter of going to radio, TV, tell people corruption is bad. You have to know the tricks, the perception, how to turn the perception into more convincing, perception. In Germany, for example, there's a lot of corruption, big time corruption. In Italy, in UK, for that matter. The British Aerospace Company. Who is talking about the British Aerospace Company? But in Tanzania, we are talking about British Aerospace rather corruption. But in UK, nobody talks about British Aerospace corruption. That's where there's big corruption in UK. So the issue here I want to bring to your attention is how do we aggregate numbers? Because our world today is data. No data, you have no right to speak. So what we speak is not supported by data. So how do we use data to make our case? And this is what I want to bring them to help us translate whatever we do into scientific data. This is what I'm asking you to understand our context. Thank you, Sopre. And I was trying to sum up your case.
Thank you very much.
Just Ringera, on the same note, can we give an applause to the presentation? And now invite Justice Ringera on the same note.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think you are a very good advocate, Sophie Williams, and a good case, but she did not present it as well as you have done in your last two sentences. I think a sense of anti-corruption authorities, we should, in our next executive committee meeting, consider very carefully corruption commission wherever you are. Nobody sees you as anything else. If you do the wrong thing, you say, hey, look at her, look at him. Those are the anti-corruption. So you condemn the entire institution. So institutional culture is a proposal that merits attention, and I'm sure we'll discuss it at our executive committee. But for now, what I want to say is that one of our objectives as EAAACA is to organize joint training of staff from our various organizations. It's a matter that we in the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission have been thinking about. We have approached some donors to fund joint training of staff. We have met with success. We do have an anti-corruption advisor who was given to us by UNODC, who is very dynamic, who is very resourceful, who is a resource in himself, in the name of Team Steel. The Musungu you can see in the table there. Team Steel has been able to obtain funding from UNODC for anti-corruption training. He has even been able to assemble a team of facilitators from several countries to train our staff on asset recovery. If the proposal is agreeable to you, as I hope it won't be, it is entirely possible to have a training seminar as early as the 24th of February 2008 in Arusha, in the Republic of Tanzania. If the dates are not convenient, we can always think of other dates, but if possible, we would really prefer that. We had the time date to coincide with the 7th Anti-Corruption Network meeting, to which Dr. Hosea and I are members. Some of the facilitators were to come for the meeting in Dar es Salaam, train people in Arusha, and then go back to their respective countries. But the network meeting has now been moved to Amsterdam. But it's still possible for them, they have indicated, to come to Arusha, train staff on the Monday the 25th and Tuesday the 26th. If staff can have arrived there on Sunday the 23rd, and we take that as our first joint training. UNODC will be able to fund the training in terms of travel costs, in terms of accommodation, in terms of meals, so that staff concerned need only to take care of their out-of-pocket expenses, if any. The proposal is to have 5 from the Prevention of Corruption Bureau in Tanzania, 5 from the Inspectorate General of Government in Uganda, 2 from Rwanda, 2 from Burundi, and 10 from Kenya, because we are perceived to be the worst boys who need asset recovery and therefore should be treated harder than anybody else. That is my proposal, Mr. President.
Thank you, Justice Wingera, for that offer, and I think I leave to the other members to accept the invitation. Maybe I'll start from Burundi.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good proposal, and we agree with it, and we'll do our best to participate for 2 members of our staff. Thank you very much.
With the reassurance from Burundi, now from Uganda.
Yeah, first of all, Mr. President, the chairperson of this meeting, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Jessica for that kind invitation. We definitely cannot wish to miss the opportunity. So when we get back, I'm sure we shall talk and then we shall communicate, and I just request that maybe something written be sent to us so that we can now process the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Though you have given us 2, but one is small, don't worry, I know. I would like to ask if you can put it